Good morning and welcome back. This is 10 Years Hence. We have with us this morning a number of guests, a few of whom I'd like to introduce. We're pleased to welcome a group of students studying microeconomics at St. Joseph High School in South Bend under the direction of Ms. Julia Chrismar. Included in this group, by the way, is Ms. Evelyn Huang, daughter of Mendoza College Dean Roger Huang. I'm sorry, Evelyn, your dad made me say that. Our speaker this morning comes to us from the City-County building in South Bend. Mayor Pete Buttigieg is the chief executive of the city of South Bend, Indiana. He is the city's 32nd mayor and was sworn into office on January 1st, 2012. As mayor, Mr. Buttigieg supervises the enforcement of municipal codes and state laws, appoints and supervises department officers, and communicates with the Common Council on financial issues and policy affairs. He also serves as the representative for the city and its residents for special events and ceremonies. Pete was born in South Bend and grew up in the North Shore Triangle neighborhood of the city. Both his father and mother teach English here at Notre Dame. Pete was valedictorian of St. Joseph's High School in 2000 and graduated from Harvard University in 2004. He worked for former U.S. Defense Secretary William Cohen in Washington, D.C., before he was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to study philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University from 2005 to 2007. After obtaining a degree from Oxford, Pete worked for McKinsey & Company, a management consulting firm where he was responsible for advising senior business and government leaders on major decisions related to economic development, energy policy, strategic business initiatives, and logistics. His work took him across the country and around the world, including to Iraq and Afghanistan. Mr. Buttigieg is also an officer in the United States Naval Reserve. He lives in the same neighborhood where he grew up and where he is now restoring a once vacant home. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the Mendoza College of Business, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you. Is everybody able to hear me? We on? All right, good. Thank you, Professor O'Rourke and Dean Wong, for the opportunity to be here. It's kind of nostalgic for me to come into this building because my mother used to teach business communications here. And so when I was about 12 years old or so, I would be rattling around some of the hallways here looking for trouble and occasionally finding it. So it's funny to think that I'd find myself on this stage. I also have to say I'm quite humbled by this invitation because I took a look at some of the other speakers and the caliber of people that you have been inviting into this series. And what I find is that they're people who are really in the midst of some very compelling work, right in the middle, or perhaps looking back on a career of innovation and achievement. I've been on the job for about 3 months, so I'm at the very beginning of my effort to innovate and to lead. And I wonder if this is what it felt like when the president heard that he was getting the Nobel Peace Prize as soon as he took office before he'd actually done anything at all. So what I'm going to try to do is offer you an account of what we're trying to do by way of innovation, what I think innovation is, some of the things that have been going on in this city, not all of it on my watch, some of the things that are going on in other cities. And then relatively quickly, I'd love to turn this into a conversation. My hope is that some of the things that you've learned can become part of this discussion and maybe guide me as I work to form better ideas for the city. I'll just say a little bit about the position I'm in, too. We think I'm America's youngest mayor of a city over 100,000 people. And so there's pretty much an expectation right out of the box that you're going to innovate. And there's a lot of attention coming to the mayor's office right now. We get a lot of different national groups paying a little more attention to South Bend than they would otherwise because of what we have here. But every time I think I'm getting a lot of attention, I get cut down to size in some way. Not long ago, I was coming back kind of after hours to take care of some late work in the office. And I was thinking about how long things take now getting around town. I had to allow extra time when I go to Martin's, because people always stop me and they want to talk about things going on in the city. And if I'm at the gym, people interrupt me and want to know something about the city. And I was just thinking about how inconvenient it is to be so famous around here. When I came up to the door and I found that the outer door I had a key for, but the inner door to get into the county city building was locked. And I made a little bit of noise and gestured. Finally, somebody from the night cleaning crew came up and cracked the door open about this far and looked at me with the one eyebrow up and said, "You work here?" So that put me right back in my place. But being a young mayor means I'm expected, I think, to innovate and to create innovation. So even in this early phase where we're trying to understand city processes, even as we work to change them, it's important that we always have that expectation in mind. What I've found so far is that there are really 3 levels on which we need to lead, 3 levels at which a mayor is responsible for organizing things, and therefore 3 levels in which you need to think about innovations. One of the things that I'm responsible for leading is a very small, very talented team of people in the mayor's office. That's the mayoral staff. We had a group of students earlier. I was talking with some Notre Dame students, and I asked, if you added up all the things that the mayor's office itself has to do, media relations, interfacing with department heads, speech writing, communications, personnel matters, all the things that go on in the mayor's office, constituent writing, how many people do you think that would come to? And they figured it would be about 40 people on staff to deal with those issues. I get 6. 6 people. They do the work of 40 people, but there's only 6 of us. But that's the first organization that I have to provide leadership to is a small team, and have to make sure that everybody's firing on all cylinders, but we're working at a pace that won't break the team, because we have to do this for years and years. The next organization is the community at large. Even people that I'm not necessarily in charge of government-wise. They might live out of city limits, but if they're in this area, if they're watching our television shows and our news, then I may be responsible for leadership for that community as well, even though there's nothing official about that role. And then the third role is being effectively the CEO of a 1,200-person, $250 million corporation, which is the city of South Bend, overseeing those departments, making sure those processes go well, and trying to keep ahead of the times. Just before plunging into what I think innovation is, I also want to say how important it is that you do reflect in the way that I think this speaker series is intended to promote, which is that you think about what the world will look like in 10 years. Because 10 years ago, when I was a college student, I'm actually going to cheat and talk about what it was like 11 years ago, we had a completely different idea of what the project of my generation was going to be about. Sitting in a classroom in the spring of 2011, I thought that things were going along just fine in general. And the biggest puzzle in the world, the biggest challenge that was going on in the world was had to do with technology. The internet was arriving. Internet technology was changing the way everybody did things. It was leading to leaps and bounds in productivity, which was leading to new economic activity and new wealth. And the biggest question facing us was, how is that wealth going to be distributed? And those were the biggest global controversies. How are we going to organize our economy and our economics so that that new prosperity and that new productivity could find its way to everybody as efficiently as possible? That's what I thought was going to be the big concern for our generation. And I was wrong. Next thing you know, because of 2001, we found ourselves in a situation where security and international affairs became the primary concern. And it's very interesting, I think, for you, as people who experienced as big an economic shock in 2008, just as you were beginning to pay attention to current affairs, as I experienced a security shock in 2001, to see if that's moved the ball back into the economic court, if what your generation is going to be preoccupied with are going to be more economic matters, and going back to those questions. And maybe we'll finally realize that the two can't be uncoupled from each other. So innovation is one of these very slippery and perhaps dangerous words, because everybody's for innovation. Everybody wants to be into innovation. The president has an innovation agenda. We've got Innovation Park across the street, operated by Notre Dame. We've got an innovation center downtown, the File Innovation Center. Nobody's against innovation. So it's very easy for everybody to feel excited about innovation. And if you have a problem, a very politically easy way to say you're going to solve it is to say, well, we're going to innovate our way out of this. But I think very little thought has been given to what innovation actually means. One definition I heard was that it's fresh thinking that creates value. And maybe there's something to that, but that's pretty broad. Another commentator said that the problem with that definition is, first of all, innovations don't have to be new. The technology for the fax machine existed for almost 70 years before it was implemented in a widespread way in the 1970s. But the timing wasn't right for it. Another thing is that innovations have to have some kind of value. They have to communicate value. If you don't have a normative measure of value, this commentator said, it's impossible to explain how this is beneficial. And we've said that innovation is beneficial by definition. Otherwise, it's just change. And change and innovation are not the same thing. Third, that innovations have to reach a certain level of adoption over time so that today's innovation becomes tomorrow's norm for everybody. This, in the view of this commentator, was the difference between a hula hoop and a small caliber rifle. Both novel, but had a different level of importance and a different level of adoption. My little contribution I would like to make to this conversation over what innovation is to think about the possibility that an innovation is really interesting or meaningful if it's addressing a pattern or a problem that already exists. So I'll give you an example. And the example is when I was, again, if we look about 10 years ago, I was just about your age, an undergraduate. And started getting funny emails one night that somebody was setting up this weird computer thing, and I signed up because everybody did. And that little computer thing was called Facebook. Joined it the day it started, and had no idea that it would turn into what it became. But if you think about what Facebook and some of the other social networking sites did, they did not invent the social network. A social network is a network of people or a set of overlapping circles of people and all the interactions that happen there. Facebook didn't invent it. It organized it. It provided a new way to map it. But Facebook would have no power if the relationships didn't already exist. The reason that it's so powerful and in many ways perhaps a little bit dangerous is that it infects the relationships we already have. It's a tool we use to monitor relationships we already care about. Your Facebook friends are your real friends first, almost always. It's almost always following what happens in real life. Another example, the more kind of pedestrian example, is air travel, one of these profound innovations, right? Space travel was also an innovation, but remember what I was saying about adoption? That if it's widely adopted and becomes the norm, that's a true innovation. Well, the difference was air travel was solving a problem we had. We had a problem with getting from one point in the country to another safely and quickly. And air travel solved it. It organized something we already do. Space travel, on the other hand, which was very exciting and interesting, didn't. Nobody had a problem with not being able to go to the moon. Nobody had a burning need driven by anything other than curiosity to go to the moon. It's not that we were looking for more efficient ways to leave the planet. We were just curious, and so we did it. But it is not widespread, and it has not been universally adopted. So I wanted to offer that little bit of theoretical framework behind what I mean when I talk about innovation. What I want to focus on today is innovation in the way we handle key elements of things that already matter to us, whether that's our management of resources, our management of data, our management of space, our management of people, or our management of relationships. When you think of the connotations of the word innovation, the first thing to come to mind is probably not government. And it's almost certainly not municipal government. There are a lot of reasons that governments, by the way they're structured, aren't natural engines of innovation. One of them is risk aversion. So the academy and the business world really encourage people to take risks. Academia is set up to encourage you to take risks. That's the whole idea of tenure. You're supposed to be able to take intellectual risks, and so you get a measure of job security and trust. That you're not being monitored for productivity week by week or year by year. And in exchange for that, you're supposed to be really creative and really innovative. In business, you innovate because it's okay for a business to fail. It might not feel okay if it's your business, but in terms of the system, in terms of the marketplace, it's okay. And so you can try different things, you can try different concepts, you can launch them as businesses, and you see whether they work or not. And if they don't, that's creative destruction and things move on. Governments can't do that. It's not okay if the fire department goes out of business because I was trying a really interesting risk and innovation. And it was worth a shot, but it just didn't work out, and our fire department's gone now. You can't do that the way it's okay for a company to go by the wayside. And so there's a good reason for that risk aversion, but it slows us down and makes it difficult for governments to lead when it comes to innovation. Another issue is the response to incentives. So you don't have the same kind of incentives in government. People are in government for different reasons. A lot of us, I'd like to believe most of us are in government because we want to serve and we want to help, but there are a lot of disincentives to be too risky because, again, there are certain environments where you're protected from the possibility of failure. In the academy, if you have an idea and it doesn't work out, you can move on to another idea. You still get to keep your job. If I have a big idea and I try it out and it doesn't work, I better have some other ones that did work, or else the incentives in terms of job security are not going to be there for me. And that leads me to a third issue that can often make innovation less likely in government, which is actually democracy. So one of the side effects of democracy, as much as we love it and want to keep it, is that it creates pressures that other people don't have to work under. Because you have to get enough people to support what you're trying to do that they buy into it and support you as a result. You don't get to just go off and say, all right, we're going to do this. Everybody, get in line. Here we go. You have to bring people along, and if you can't bring people along, they justifiably can fire you. Lastly, there are patterns among winners and losers. One of the patterns is that often when a government action creates winners or losers, there are more of one than the other. And sometimes there are different levels. Imagine a sugar subsidy. Imagine if there was a sugar subsidy in place that was economically inefficient. And if you got rid of it, 300 million Americans would be better off to the tune of about $2 a year. And 10,000 sugar farmers would be worse off to the tune of losing their livelihood. What do you think is going to happen? If you take all the energy and excitement that 300 million Americans could get about saving $2 by getting rid of this inefficiency and weigh it against how active a bunch of people who face the loss of their livelihoods are going to be, chances are the latter are going to win. This is not a new insight. Machiavelli actually pointed this out. He said, "It must be considered that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all those who profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit by the new order. This lukewarmness arising partly from fear of their adversaries, who have the laws in their favor, and partly from the incredulity of mankind, who do not truly believe in anything new until they have had actual experience of it. Thus it arises that on every opportunity for attacking the reformer, his opponents do so with the zeal of partisans. The others only defend him half-heartedly, so that between them he runs great danger." And that's what it's like in government if you're trying to bring about an innovation that might have winners and losers. How many of you, since we're in a largely economic and business-oriented group, how many of you have studied the concept of Pareto optimality or Pareto efficiency? Is that something that most of you are familiar with? Handful? Okay. We have to distinguish between the search for efficiency, which is a technical problem, and the search for the right answer, which is often a moral problem. And elected officials are expected to handle both. But usually innovation can only help us with the technical side of things. So with that, I'll give you one more footnote, which is there are some areas where government can actually be better at efficiency. Government really did literally invent the internet. The internet started out as something called ARPANET. It was part of DARPA, the Defense is a Pentagon Research Agency. And I think the reason that that can happen is that for all the pressures I told you that weigh against innovation and risk-taking in government, government has something that a lot of individuals and even the market don't always have, which is a longer time horizon. So politicians may have a short time horizon, but government as a whole can contemplate, and actually has to as a matter of duty, contemplate what the impact will be of its decisions 20 or 50 or 100 years hence, and it doesn't have to worry about making sure that the net present value of what they're doing materializes for an investor within their lifetimes. I'm tempted to wax a little more on innovation, but I'm going to go straight to some examples that I think are interesting. Let me start by talking about the organization of infrastructure and resources. And some of these examples, right here in South Bend, actually have a lot to do with Notre Dame. So let's talk about one of the most interesting subjects in city government. I know it's one of the things that I was itching to do when I was studying philosophy at Oxford, and that is sewage. Nobody has ever called my office and said, Mayor, my toilet flushed and it worked just fine, and I just want to say, great job. Thank you. It worked. Nobody ever calls and says, I opened the tap and I filled a glass of water and I gave it to my kids and it didn't poison them or anything. They just drank it and they were fine. That really is an amazing thing when you add up how much work it takes to do it and how long humanity went without it. And if there was the slightest problem with it, we would absolutely be getting phone calls. But it's something that we don't always think about. This is not very far from where we are right now, I think less than a mile or two. This magnificent set of structures is the South Bend Wastewater Treatment Plant. It can handle about 100 million gallons a day. Now, you need to understand, to see why this is exciting to me, you need to understand the distinction between wastewater and stormwater. Every time it rains 1 inch, so probably since the beginning of this lecture, judging by the storm clouds when I walked into this building, 1 billion gallons of rain fall in the city of South Bend. And most of that has to go somewhere. A little bit of it, if it falls on soil, it might get absorbed, but most of it has to go somewhere. It falls on street, if it falls on asphalt, if it falls on your roof, if it falls on my porch, it goes somewhere. Where does it go? Well, it goes down the drain, right? And for most citizens, that's the last time you ever have to think about it. Meanwhile, you got all your other structures that are putting wastewater, different from stormwater, worse, into the system. That's your orange, colorfully presented stuff here. So this orange stuff makes its way to the wastewater treatment plant. By the time they're done with it, it's clean, and your fish and your fishermen are both very happy because we have a healthy river. So it's raining. Here's the problem. A lot of cities were built, and ours is one of them, in a certain way that basically combined those two systems. So they all go through the same pipes. And if you have a lot of rain, you see that blue water, that's your storm water, not to be confused with your wastewater. It's going to make its way through the same channel. As that happens, you have a risk of the wastewater actually backing up and overwhelming our poor old treatment plant. And then you get an overflow. Untreated sewage going into the river, bad for fish, bad for fishermen, bad news for Mayor Pete. This is something the federal government noticed, and they decided we can't do that anymore. Us and a whole bunch of other cities. You can no longer put untreated sewage into the river. This, I think, would generally be regarded as a good development. So I very much appreciated when the EPA let us know that from now on, this was going to be fixed. Regrettably, they did not indicate how we were going to pay for it to be fixed, which means that the city of South Bend has a $500 million sewer bill in order to rearrange all our pipes and get enough capacity that this doesn't happen. Just to give you a little perspective, that's 10 times my annual budget. So we have a problem. What can we do about it? Well, one of the things we can do is try to better design the pipes we do have so that we don't have these kinds of overflow events. You're the mayor, you got to do something about this. Here are some of your options. One of them is to build a new plant, usually not cost effective, and even doing it doesn't fix things entirely. Another one is to build gigantic tanks underground. This apparently works in Chicago. I don't have $3 billion, we're not going to do it. There's an idea concerning inline storage. You can sort of inflate objects that will block it. It's been tried in some cases, but in this case it's cartoon, not an option at the moment. That leaves us with actually digging underground and laying new sewer lines so that there's one route that the stormwater goes down, one route that the wastewater goes down, and having a lot of stormwater doesn't mean that wastewater finds its way into the river before it finds its way to my plant. The less we have to do that, the better. And so the question became, is there anything we can do to manage what's in those pipes? Now, it turns out, and I'm doing my best not to take you into all the exciting and lovely details of wastewater management, but it turns out that the way our sewers work is not that different from the way traffic lights work. And our sewers, most sewers in America, are what you would call dumb. So if you sit at a traffic light, the old technology, there's actually a physical object in the box off to the side, if you notice that. It's a cam, and it's on a sort of a timer, and it rotates. And so you pull up, you're at, say, Angela and Edison and Notre Dame Avenue. You're tired, it's late, nobody else is around. You pull up, it's a red light, and you have to wait until that little metal object turns, even though you're the only one there, and you had a little bit too much to eat, and you really want to be home right now, and you're waiting, then it clicks, and the light's green. We've gotten better with traffic lights, but we haven't really caught up to that with sewers until recently. So thanks to a brilliant public works director who was hanging around Notre Dame, an idea came about. And the idea was, what if we could monitor those intersections in the sewer system and find out how much water was where when? Would that allow us to make better decisions and route it in a better way and avoid what we have to spend on new build? By doing that, this here is a little gadget that actually goes in the sewer. It's about the size of a credit card. And then it talks to a little, Wi-Fi technology was big here. It talks to a little box on a pole. We spent maybe $5 million on this and probably saved $100 million just in not having to put in new pipes, because we now have this system with the little nodes talking to the boxes, sending the data over to our city engineer here, who can make good decisions in real time. It's under the hood. Nobody's ever going to call us to tell us they think it's great, but people sure would have called if I was passing those $100 million we didn't have to spend on to ratepayers or taxpayers. So that's one story of innovation in South Bend, having to do with Notre Dame. Here's another one. We actually have one of the most advanced and high bandwidth dark fiber loops. Raise your hand if you know what a dark fiber loop is. Okay, that's about where I was when I got here. Dark fiber loops in the country. To the extent the internet actually exists physically, and it really does, we never think about this, but the internet is physical. I mean, it has to run through somewhere. It's not all wireless. It goes through fiber. And that fiber runs all across the country. And what it does is it passes through a lot of the old right-of-ways that were created by railroads and by the interstate system, which means if you think about railroads and the internet system, a lot of it's coming through here. It passes right under us. Right along this network, and you can see, if you train on South Bend, you see that big cluster? There's an awful lot going on in between the East Coast and Chicago, which is great news for us economically. Somebody realized that not only could we tap into that, but we could use a lot of the conduit that's already underground for the sewers, for the traffic lights. We got a system of fiber that controls our traffic lights. We could lay some fiber optic cable in there. And by doing that and making it available to anybody who wants to buy in, we could create a level of bandwidth. Here's the picture I was looking for. So your dial-up, you all probably don't even remember dial-up. What we have in Notre Dame is, if you're in a hardwired connection, is probably around this speed, 1.5 megabits per second. Maybe on a local area network, maybe you're at 10. This thick band from here to there, that's what we can have with this MetroNet. And so it enables us, again, it's a new solution to an old problem. The old problem was how to get data around. The new solution was run it through pipes we already got. And it had a big impact. This is one of my favorite cases of innovation, again, involving a partnership between the University of Notre Dame and the city of South Bend. We had two problems that seemed completely unrelated. Problem number one are greenhouses. We have this great greenhouse. It's over by the Potawatomi Zoo. It's actually quite distinctive, and it has a lot of rare plant species, and it's got a big dome, and it is a treasure. And in today's budget environment, it is also unaffordable. It costs about $100,000 a year just to heat the thing. And so the city was put in a position where we were likely going to have to close it. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a lot of people operating high-performance computing networks were facing a problem. The problem was they were spending a lot of money to cool them off. Every time these computers get faster, they get hotter. And that's going to be true for as long as computers rely on semiconductor technology as we know it. So these people somehow found each other. The people who had a problem cooling off the computers and the people who had a problem heating up their greenhouses. So what do? We put a computer right by the greenhouse, and we pipe in the heat. We suck the heat off the computers, we pump it into the greenhouse, saving everybody money. And because we have the MetroNet, we can hook the computer up to where it is as quickly connected to the rest of what's going on up here at Notre Dame as though it were in the same room. And we get to keep our cactus. So we're pretty excited about that kind of, and it just shows you the kinds of opportunities you have if you bring disparate elements of what's going on in the same community together in order to solve an old problem with a new solution. Speaking of old problems, I don't know if any of you have noticed, but there's a 1 million square foot disused factory right at the south side of downtown South Bend. It has been there for much longer than I have walked this earth, and it has been empty since 1963, when the Studebaker Car Company closed its doors. Almost 1 million square feet. Problem. I actually can't afford to blow it up. It's that big. And so for years, policymakers have been scratching their heads trying to figure out what they're going to do with this thing. Can you save it? Do we have to tear it down somehow? Meanwhile, remember what I was saying about fiber optics running along rail lines? Union Station, which was a disused mess of an old train station, was purchased by someone who operates what's called a telecom hotel, basically a set of carrier interchanges where the different internet carriers who control data as it flows through this fiber optic network can switch providers and get to each other. And he used the funding from that in order to rehabilitate Union Station, but also operates a whole bunch of data-intensive, high-security, high-performance processes there. I won't tell you who, but at least one sports team that many of you will have bought tickets for executes their trades when you do the lottery online, actually executes that in South Bend, Indiana. Once again, those computers are generating an awful lot of heat. It turns out if you can solve the problem of how to capture that heat and do something with it, you can take such a huge amount off the energy bill for using this building that it becomes economically viable again. So in a few years, if all goes well and your mayor gets his way, we're going to see this building come back to life for the first time in 50 years. So just a few ideas about the organization of resources. We can also organize our data in a different way. This has just come into existence. I kind of hesitate to show you this because sometimes you learn a little more than you want to, but this is crimereports.com. We are now mapping, as of this week, all the data about all the crime in all its different varieties that happens in the city. Because I think it's better if we know about it than if we don't. You can do different layers. You can see what police beat you're in. You can see what actions the police took. You can see what the results were. Anything from a burglary to a more serious crime. Of course, just having this data, it doesn't exactly make us feel better, and it doesn't exactly solve a problem. But you start by organizing it, in this case, organizing it geographically, because then law enforcement officers can start to look for patterns. And when you can look for patterns, you can start to do something before the crime happens instead of afterwards. Do we know that somebody getting their water cut off is likely to happen within 3 weeks of copper getting stolen out of a building? Now we can find out. Another thing we're trying to innovate in is how we organize our space. This is, I know it looks like something out of Sin City. What you're seeing here is a heat map of the problem of vacant and abandoned properties in South Bend. Notre Dame's right up there. Green, not a lot of vacant properties. Yellow, some vacant properties. Red, 70% or more of that block is vacant, according to the Census Bureau. This is a problem. But at least now we can begin to organize our information about where the problem is. The next step, now that we have it mapped, is to begin layering onto this, kind of like I was showing you here, a bunch of different layers. And so my team and I are working now to add in, okay, have we checked which of the red areas are close to a school? Or which of the red areas are close to a major roadway that's where people form first impressions? If we got to invest somewhere and we can't fix everything, where do we begin? You can prioritize by looking at the relationships in space between some of these different problems and opportunities. Speaking of opportunities, another innovation in the use of space is the development of the pocket park. It's a little bitty park. You put it, in this case, there's a plan for, you got a building here, you got a house there, you got a parking lot or a vacant lot. You turn it into a little park. Maybe not forever, but it holds the land for decent use going forward. Right here in South Bend, we have about 40 of these and growing. If you ever go to Fiddler's Hearth and order the kale, your kale was grown in an urban garden right here in South Bend. And that's true for a lot of different restaurants, and it's true for a lot of different people around town. It's a way to get kids aware that those kids there at veggie tasting. Not quite the same as a wine tasting, but they're pretty into it. and it makes good use of the land. It's more sustainable. Another thing when it comes to data is the use of data to drive decisions. It's one thing to gather all the data. Then what do you do with it? The city of Baltimore launched a process called CityStat. The first year they did it, they saved about $12 million. The way they did that was simply by counting up what they did and looking at it more carefully. Mayor Goldsmith in Indianapolis did something like this. They had never before done something kind of routine in business called activity-based costing. So if you look at my budget, I can show you exactly how much we spend on personnel in the street department. And I can show you exactly how much we spend in equipment in the street department, and exactly how much we spend on pothole patching filler. I have no idea what it costs to fill in a pothole. No idea. Because we've never counted it that way. Now we're going to. And sometimes when you count things in a new way, it's old data, it's an old problem, how do we spend our money efficiently, but it's a new approach. You learn something. In Indianapolis, they started counting what it costs per truck to keep a truck going. So instead of saying, here's our maintenance budget, they said, okay, per truck, how much are we spending? There was one truck that they had spent $252,000 to repair over the course of a year. $252,000. A new one would have been $90,000. But they never knew that because they never counted. And this is a chance to change the way we do that. I want to mention another kind of zone of innovation that we don't hear about as much, and that's the organization of people and their time. Something we think about a lot, especially in my team. And here, one of the lessons is that everything old is new again. Some of you may have heard that at Google, employees are actually expected to spend a fifth of their time dealing with something that is not part of their job description or their official responsibilities. A fifth of their time. And that's not goofing off. They're working. But they're working outside the structure they normally work in. They just think up ideas and pursue them. One of those ideas that they thought up and pursued was Gmail. That's how that was invented. Now, they call it 20% time. It turns out that a generation ago, there was something called 15% time at a company called 3M, and that's where the Post-it note got invented. So often it's a matter of seeing what good practices are out there. They don't have to be new. They just have to solve a problem in a new way. We're learning more and more about some of the orthodoxies of management. When I was starting at McKinsey, I once made a remark that I was really relieved that a project had evolved so that I could really focus on one thing and really concentrate on this one big puzzle we were trying to solve for a client. And I was actually pulled aside by a manager and told, you should go easy on that. I'm excited to work on one thing because you're supposed to be able to show that you can multitask. We really like multitasking. Multitasking is good. Well, a lot of the latest research is actually showing us that multitasking can be very harmful. I see some folks multitasking right now, and that's all right. But if you're trying to concentrate on something, and you have an interruption, and it's a higher cognitive function, it will take you about 15 minutes just to recover from that interruption and reach the level of concentration you had had before. There's been a lot of research on this, and what it shows is that multitaskers are better than the general population at what you might call immediate low-level functionality. So a quick problem comes in, an urgent problem comes in, it can be solved without too much thinking. You can do more and more of that at a time if you're multitasking. They become worse than the general population at thinking. So I'm just going to leave you with that when you think about how you organize your time and how many things you try to do at once. I have a whole bunch of other things I'd love to talk about, but I really was eager to find out what you've heard so far in this series and what kinds of things and ideas and opportunities are rattling around this great university. And so I think I'm going to ask that we open it up for questions. And I've noticed the Notre Dame students love to just pounce on an open microphone as soon as that happens, so I'm sure that'll happen once again. And if somebody doesn't come up, I'm going to start asking you questions. Nobody wants that.
Pete, let me begin and just ask how you keep your thumb on the pulse of the community. Where do you go for data, for input? I mean, there are things you know, but there are also things you feel.
Yeah.
So how do you gather that information?
So it's tricky. The more senior you become in an organization, the less you know about what's going on in some ways in that organization. And it's a big challenge for me walking in at the top of a 1,200-person organization. And that's just inside the city government, let alone what's going on out in the community, right? Talking again about those different levels of organization I have to lead. To find out what's going on in the city government, the first thing I try to do is I just show up. So I'll pop into a department and just see what's going on. Or I'll turn up on a work site. We try to arrange for that. So at least talk to the folks and have some sense of what's happening. I even do a little bit of mystery shopping sometimes. I saw a dead possum on the road, and I put that request into the system as a citizen. And now I'm going to circle back from inside government and see how long it takes to get fixed. And we're going to see what we learn about customer service in the process. The greater community, the best thing you can do is find people who you trust enough that they'll tell you the truth. See, trust is really not about people telling you things about themselves that they're used to keeping in confidence. That's one level of trust. The highest level of trust is people being prepared to tell you things about you that they would not ordinarily feel comfortable discussing with you. I believe the highest level of friendship is somebody who knows you better than you know yourself and will tell you if you're making an ass of yourself. And in the same way, you need that from the whole community, and I need to have leaders. Now, some of them will be in a hurry to let me know if I'm doing something wrong, especially some of our friends on the South End Common Council. But others, you have to draw them out, and it's a matter of trust, and so you have to spend a lot of time listening, and that's how you begin to gather some information. Listening is a very powerful thing. It took me years to figure it out, but if you just ask a couple questions and shut up and see what somebody says, that's incredible what you can learn and what they'll give you. Yes? I'd love for you to just introduce yourself, maybe where you're from. And
I'm Brian Vode. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
Great.
So you talked a little bit about the police force and mapping crime in the area. I think from a Notre Dame student's perspective, sometimes we feel that the police are more concerned with arresting, 20-year-old kids at a party than stopping some of the more serious crimes going on. And with the budget being so tight, can you talk about that in terms of revenue and also in terms of, is that just a misconception from us? Because obviously we deal with that more versus the stopping more serious crimes like burglaries and murders. Thank you for going too.
Well, first of all, I'm very sensitive to that perception because I think it's important to be able to, first of all, make sure students feel welcome in the community. I consider, technically you're outside the territorial city limits of South Bend, at least when you're on campus, but I consider you people for whose safety I'm responsible in many ways. And I agree with you that while we enforce all laws, and that's what we're charged with doing, that we need to prioritize the things that are most urgent. This is one of the reasons that I'm concerned with getting more data and more information. Right now, my general fund budget, so the budget we actually have any discretion over, is about $60 million. 80% of that is public safety. And more than half of that concerns the police department. So it's tough to fund it any more than we're funding it. The question then becomes, okay, we got 19 police beats over the city, being patrolled at any given time. How do you use that most efficiently? I think what we're going to learn when we take a more data-driven approach is that there are some things emerging that are more urgent than others. But my real goal is to be able to get ahead of things. So one of the things I mentioned, keeping the pulse, one of the things I did is I just invited myself into a police car, rode around on the midnight shift with an officer on a Friday night. Very interesting. One of the things I noticed is a lot of the calls are to what you would call frequent flyers. So as soon as the call came in, as soon as the officer heard the address, he knew who and he knew what. And then the question becomes, well, why are we reacting? If you already know that, is there anything we could have done to get out ahead of this so that you're not responding to a call, you're heading one off? And that's where using the predictive power of data, not just the analytical power, here's what's going on, but okay, typically if A has happened, we know that B is going to happen pretty soon after that. How do we use that? But that's a culture change, especially in Midwestern municipal government. We're not necessarily big on the latest approaches to data-driven performance management. And so I'm working to bring that about. But I think we can, and my hope is that you'll see and you'll feel, and there has been great progress in this direction, I think. The other thing I'd say is the dialogue is so important, so just talking. And the CCAC, Campus Community Advisory Committee, has brought together leaders from both the student body and the city, and I think it's an extremely positive development. Yes?
My name is Drew Mitchell. I'm from Minnesota. So there was a really cool article in the New York Times this past weekend about some individuals in the community who took a house and they've rehabbed this house and they're trying to bring it back to life, and kind of seeing the vacancy issue that was up on the screen. Is there any way that the city can encourage innovation amongst its residents to encourage sort of those types of programs?
Yes, it's a great question, and yeah, we have to, right? Because at the end of the day, the city government is a small part of the city, and we only have so many resources. So you really need to rely, every time I do anything, every time I invest $1 of public funds, the question I'm asking myself is, does this investment of $1, could this possibly unlock another 10 somehow out in the community? And what the New York Times article was about, and I invite you if you haven't to take a look at it, it was about people taking control in their own neighborhoods. So they got together and they would invest in the house. Now, what I'd really love is to get the math to prove what I suspect is true, which is that if enough people on a block participate and you got that rotten house on the corner that's vacant and it's been sitting there for years and it's pulling down the neighborhood and it's pulling down your value, I would love to be able to prove that the investment you make, if you pool your resources, buy it and fix it up, will come back to you in what happens to your property value of your own home on that block. I don't have that yet, but I'd like to. You know, of all the different innovations, the one that's the flavor of innovation that is going to be most likely to catch the attention of a policymaker, innovating in how we address things, how we organize people, how we solve issues, how we spend money, how we pay for things is a great area to innovate in, because how we used to pay for things isn't always working anymore. So unlocking that willingness of neighbors to step up and get involved is critical. One of the things we're doing on that specific problem of vacant and abandoned houses, we have a task force that meets publicly, and it's got everybody I think needs to be at the table in order to solve the problem: neighborhood folks, county, city, legal, you name it. Notre Dame, actually, an academic who studies these issues from a legal perspective, all at the table. But what we really need to do is deepen that group's role in the public so that we're asking people, hey, can you be part of the solution here? And challenge people to be creative. And then all I have to do is kind of bless it or endorse it or unlock it or make sure it's legal in some way. And then we have a powerful solution in a new way to an old problem.
My name is Michael. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. At the national level, a lot of innovation is impeded by partisan politics. Do you find that there's more innovation on the local level because there's not as much partisan politics? Absolutely.
This is probably the best thing about being a mayor, is partisanship almost never comes up. It's incredible. Once in a blue moon, there'll be something maybe about taxes or maybe social issues come in that are more ideological. But I'd say 95% of the time, doesn't matter. I've had very liberal Democrats support me. I've had very conservative Republicans who I'm sure would never help me at all if I were running for federal office and working on those issues. But on the city issues, see, so much of what you're doing in the city is about delivery, right? It's the line is that there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up trash or fill in a pothole. The other thing is, I think the results are a little bit more immediate. So even if you want to innovate in some way locally that actually does have a little bit of ideology at stake. So I don't know, maybe we have something that's always been done by government employees, and I want to ask about, would it be any different if we open this up to competition? Would we get better results? We can actually try it and see, and the results are pretty hard to argue with, where when you're operating at such a big scale, at that national scale, everything you do is so overdetermined that even if you do something right and it works, it's pretty hard to prove it, and if you can prove it, a lot of people won't believe you anyway. So one of the things that is fantastic about being a mayor is you just really, 9 times out of 10, I don't even know. Some of the people that I work with, I have no idea what their party politics or ideology is because it just doesn't come up.
Hi, I'm John from Chicago. I'm just wondering, we had Governor Daniels here a couple months ago, and he was talking about what he's doing to bring existing businesses into Indiana through tax incentives, regulatory reforms, and such. Are you doing anything similar here in South Bend?
We are actually doing a comprehensive overhaul of the Community and Economic Development Department. And I didn't talk about it today because even though I think we're going to be able to innovate a lot there, I haven't got the results to show for it yet. And so it'll be a little while before I can show you really what we achieved and how. But I'll tell you what we're doing. First of all, we need to have a better imagination about what business attraction involves. Right now, we have a very narrow focus in our community on tax incentives. And we have a very narrow focus on real estate. So we basically do two things. We cut your taxes, we give you a selective tax abatement, or we buy you something, we put money into a real estate deal to buy things down for you. Those are tools that can work, but they work on the margins. If this is not a business, a community that makes sense for your business to be in, if we don't have an adequate workforce, if your employees don't feel safe, if getting anything out of the government is like pulling teeth just to get a question answered, it's unlikely that I will succeed by tricking you into moving here with a little tax treat, right? So I think that those tax incentives, they work on the margin if you got it narrowed, they've got you narrowed down to us and 2 or 3 other places, and the costs, you add up land, labor, utility, cost of doing business is taxes, and we're so close, but we're not quite there, and I can scoop the next guy by offering a little bit of an incentive. Then it helps. And it shows goodwill. But really, I mean, deep down, the best things I can do for economic development, make sure the streets are safe, make sure we have a workforce that's ready and that's competitive, and make sure that the city government is easier to deal with. And that's the other area where I think we can innovate a little bit is how do we simplify your relationship, if you're a business person, to the government. Right now, you could call, there are a lot of city processes where it's not obvious who to call. If you see a street light out, if it was on the East Bank Trail, you call the Parks Department. If it was on another road, you would call AEP, the utility. If it was on a different road, you'd call the city engineer. You shouldn't have to figure that out. You should be able to call one number, 311, if I get that system up and running in time. And whoever picks up the call will go out and figure out who to do it. Same thing with more complicated business questions. We need to reduce the number of handoffs so that people know who they're dealing with. And if they say, I want South Bend on line 1, there's somebody to pick up who's their kind of one-stop shop. Now, doing that is easier said than done, but I think we can get there. And I think that's part of what Governor Daniels has rightly gotten some credit for, is making sure that the reputation of our community, of our state, is that it's one that's easy to do business. So we make that first cut when they're deciding of all the 100 places they could go, they cut it down to 5. If I could make it into that top 5, then I get to go do the sales pitch. But a lot of times, we never get that far.
Hi, my name's John, and I'm from outside of DC. You obviously have a very impressive resume, and are now the mayor, the youngest mayor of a city of this size. And I was wondering what your career aspirations were, assuming that you don't want to stay in South Bend your entire life.
That's a terrible assumption. I love South Bend. I've lived in a lot of places, Phoenix, England, DC. DC is very nice, by the way, nothing against DC. But one of the things that happened to me as I grew older, I think, as I got to this ripe old age at 30, is that I began to really appreciate what it means to be part of a community. And the effect that it has on you to be part of a community you grew up in is very meaningful. So I have no idea 10 years hence, so to speak, where I'll be. I think there's a very good chance I'll be right here. I think people might get sick of me after more than 10 years as mayor. All I really know is that any opportunity to do anything else, academically or in business or in government, will only come if I turn out to be very good at being mayor. Because one of the things about it's kind of nifty that I'm the youngest mayor. It's a nice footnote. But really all anybody cares about now is am I any good or not? And that's all that gets recorded. Most people, we don't remember Teddy Roosevelt because he was the youngest president up until recently. We remember him because he was highly impactful. And that's kind of an interesting detail, that he was extremely young, right? I think that's how it's going to be for me now. And so have to concentrate more than anything on just what are the results, what do we have to show for it. And then if I'm good, all kinds of opportunities may come my way. But I bought a big kind of rundown house on the river, and I work on it a lot, and that thing's not going to be fixed for at least 30 years, so I wouldn't count on going anywhere.
Hi, my name is Nia. I'm from Jersey, and education is a topic that's spoken about a lot in the nation. So are there any things I'm not very familiar with South Bend's educational system, but I guess in regards to elementary and especially secondary education, are there any innovations or changes that are going on to ensure that they can continue on with that education?
Yeah, it's a great question. Education is probably the most important thing I don't control. Talk about economic development, for example. When I go out to these factories and different businesses in town, especially the good ones, the ones that are really competitive, the ones that are exporting to China from South Bend right now, which does happen. Those kinds of companies, they exist because they're doing very distinctive things. There's a lot of intellectual property, or there's a lot of advanced process involved in what they do. Their survival depends on an educated workforce. So even in the economic development bucket, let alone the simple fact that good education makes for better lives and better citizens, and that everything that's good that's happened in my life had to do with education, it's obviously very important. So what do you do when one of the most important factors affecting your community is outside your control? School board, they're elected separately. They appoint the superintendent. One of my predecessors got a phone call, as soon as he was elected, from the school superintendent saying, "Congratulations, Mayor. Very happy for you. Glad you got elected. You run the city, I'll run the schools, and we'll get along just fine." The problem with that is that we really depend on each other. Everything from land use to public safety to economic development is really an area of overlap between the concerns of the school corporation and the concerns of the city. Luckily, I have a very proactive and cooperative partner in the new school superintendent. So we came in at roughly the same time, and we're working on things that we can do together. Everything from little under the hood type stuff, this kind of technical efficiency stuff. Can we buy, how much do they spend on software licenses? How much do I spend on software licenses? Is it the same software? If so, can we save some money and make sure more of their dollars make it to the classroom, right? So it's everything from that to me maybe even hitting the road and helping recruit teachers, which is always a challenge, getting the very best and most capable teachers to come here. And as you know, if you spend time studying education, a lot of the biggest predictors for whether a student's going to make it are actually outside the classroom. It's things like the emotional stability of the home, income, nutrition, and those fall actually back in our lap in a lot of ways. If any of you are interested in having a real impact in this community, I would highly encourage you to consider mentoring a child in South Bend, especially a young, lower-income child in the South Bend Community School Corporation. The impact of something as simple as that is unbelievably profound. And it's one of the things that I'm always pushing people to do. So you better believe it's on my mind. And it's never easy, but there's a lot we can do. Here's a question.
Hi, I'm Gracie Gallagher from St. Joe, and I was wondering, thanks. Last year, I think it was, South Bend was put on a list of one of the top dying cities in America. And so I was wondering what your, 5-year vision is for increasing the liveliness of South Bend.
I like that, the liveliness of South Bend. Well, part of what drove that unfavorable ranking was actually they were looking at data on young people and the brain drain and the loss of young people from South Bend. They were also looking at population in general, and that has declined through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now it's kind of stabilized, but we lost a lot of people. It was not as much as Cleveland, but we lost about 30% of our people after Studebaker closed. It's one of the reasons I'm borrowing a lot of land use ideas from Cleveland, because they faced a very big population loss. So what do we do? Well, one thing, again, is it comes down to young people, right? If we can create a vibrant environment that people want to be part of, and a lot of that, a government official is not the right person to make a community cool, right? That's probably the last thing that I should be trying to think that I could have an impact on directly. But indirectly, can I create more of a space where people can do their thing and where it could be more creative and more culturally interesting and more attractive? Actually, what's happening with the St. Joe High School is very exciting because it means a lot more young people coming into the heart of the city. And the great thing about cities, if you get a chance, one of the most interesting things written in recent years on cities is a book by Ed Glaeser, Glaeser, called The Triumph of the City. And basically what he's done is he's shown that the reason that cities have such an impact is density. And the reason density matters is so much comes from people bumping into each other. And those little collisions, those little interactions on the street corner or around the coffee pot in the office, that's where a lot of human creativity is unleashed. And so from a planning perspective, the question becomes, how do we design our city going forward so that we create the right kinds of spaces that make it possible for those chance interactions to happen, that stimulate creativity, enhance our kind of cultural, as you said, liveliness, right? That in turn makes this kind of desirable place. So that whether it's the university recruiting a rock star faculty member who's young and single and is trying to decide whether South Bend's the right place for her, or whether it's me trying to convince somebody to join city government, or whether it's an executive saying, okay, this place seems to be okay for my company economically, but do I really want to put 40 engineers here, or are they all going to flee, right? That comes down to a lot of this so-called softer stuff. And little things like, and I know I think next week or soon, you're going to hear from a speaker on the importance of design and how design matters and why design matters for cities. Little things you can do to nudge people into certain patterns, simply by where you put not even where you put a street, but sometimes something as little as where you put a light can make a huge impact. And so I'm very alive to that. Luckily, I've got some very talented team members who are exploring ways to do that. But a lot of it also depends on you. Do you make the city your own? Do you feel like you own the city a little bit and that you're responsible for convincing other people to hang out in the heart of our city and creating interesting new things and keeping them here? And I think without young people, we won't make it. It's one of the reasons I ran.
Other questions?
Yeah.
One here.
My name is Sid, and I'm from South Bend. And I don't know if everyone knows how often you listen to young people. For instance, the little boy that wrote you about the stop sign, and you helped get that stop sign where it was needed, and it was a really big thing. And also you listen to your alma mater students from that school. I can't remember the name of it, but they came to your, Stanley Clark, and they came to your office and gave you ideas of how to make the city better. And they were some of the same ideas that were paid for by experts. So, and also, and lastly, you communicate with the community and have your pulse on what's going on by having the mayor's night out. And I was fortunate enough to attend the other night, and it wasn't just you, it was all your department heads that you could talk to, and I got a lot of things accomplished, so thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, that kind of communication is so important. So as much as we're into high-tech communication, and I'm on Twitter and we're Facebooking and all that, it's pretty great, pretty powerful to just be able once a month to make sure that anybody who comes through the door can sit down with me. And we have those mayor's nights out every month. And I suppose it's a sort of innovation. It's low tech, but it's very powerful. The other story she was talking about is one of my favorite things that's happened in my first few weeks here in government, which is a 12-year-old kid sends me an email. Actually happened before I got in. Said, I feel really unsafe in my neighborhood because these cars zip by, there's this corner, it's very dangerous, there have been a lot of crashes, and I think there ought to be a stop sign there. And I wrote back and said, all right, thanks, kid. You know, haven't actually won yet, but if I get into office, we'll check it out. So the day after the election, I get another email from this 12-year-old kid. It says, all right, you know, now that you have won, I want to get to the matter of the stop sign. And I kicked it over to the engineers, asked them to take a look at it. They did an analysis, found that, but long story short, the kid was right. It wasn't safe, and there had to be a stop sign. So we went out together, this kid and I, and we installed the stop sign. And it felt great because there are certain moments when you actually get to make sure that government works the way a 12-year-old boy would like to believe the government works. you can actually have those moments. It's one of the most rewarding, and yet another reason that I think local government, although I never would have dreamed of it when I was a sophomore in college, local government is the most compelling and rewarding thing you can do, because you can actually get a problem like that, and you can actually fix it. And that's one of the things that this technology also has enabled. I think if he turned up at the office, I'm not sure what would have happened, but somehow this kid got my email address, and I saw it, and that was that. And the other thing I want to say about listening to young people, when you become, I don't know, I guess somewhere in adolescence, maybe it's because you get lied to in so many ways when you're a kid, for various reasons. When you're in adolescence, you develop this incredibly sharp kind of BS detector. And it sits somewhere in you, and it just goes off at the slightest bit of insincerity or inauthenticity. But it's got this weird half-life, and as you go into a career and age, and as you move out of college and start getting involved, for most people it seems for some reason to lose its sensitivity. And I raise this because I think young people that I spend time with, especially college and high school students, have the most penetrating questions and often the most insightful ideas. Maybe because they're not bound by some of the pieties and orthodoxies and cautions that attend actually being in government or navigating various careers. I don't know exactly why it is, but it's for that reason that I'm more candid than normal when I'm around young people, because I feel like I'll be called out if I'm not. And it's one of the reasons I listen whenever I can to what young people have to say.
Time for one more.
Speaking of economic development and creating a cool city, I've been doing some research into business models, low overhead business models, and in different cities that are also having economic recovery issues. A huge trend is mobile businesses, because there's such a lower overhead for running like a specific type of food truck versus running a whole restaurant.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, or like a mobile spa or a mobile whatever. What are the regulations? Do you know? In this city around mobile type of businesses, because that is the #1 prohibitive issue.
I don't. It's a great question. I love the communities I've been to with food trucks. I think are pretty exciting. You do want them to be regulated. In Cambridge, they have these kebab vans. They sell these mystery meat on a spit. It kind of rotates around. I've never seen anybody go up to one of those vans sober, but it's there. Oxford had a bunch of them. In Cambridge, there are 2. One of them is called the van of life, and the other is called the van of death. And the problem is, if you're in the state of mind where that kind of food seems appealing to you, you're probably not in the state of mind that you're going to remember which one's the van of life and which one's the van of death and why. So you do want them to be clean, but you also want them to be there. It's a great idea. In fact, the first thing that went through my mind as you thought that up was, is there any way we can do that in government? Because if the work is mobile, maybe the infrastructure or the physical plant should be mobile too. And so it set me starting to think of all the things we do, whether it's code inspections or some of the services we deliver around sewer pothole patching. I don't know, but maybe more of our work can be mobile. I'm tempted to actually call out somebody from the city attorney office who happens to be here. Do you know anything on that?
We do license food vendor vehicles, actually. We do have licenses for that. And we, as a city, we license some types of businesses, and so some of them have to be in certain areas, but many of them can travel from place to place. So your food example, and like somebody like a massage therapist, usually they're associated with a place, but it's conceivable to have licensing that is mobile as well.
I'd love to explore more of that. So, in fact, I'll leave you with this. The other reason I think states too, but smaller governments in our system of government are actually poised for innovation and experimentation despite all the challenges that we have as governments. I think because there are so many of us, because there are so many cities, as well as states, that are each empowered in our American system to do their thing, that even if you think you've come up with the newest new thing ever, chances are some variation on it's been tried. And I'm very open to exploring, okay, where is this working best and how? And is there anything we should do to emulate that in order to make it easier? Because I know the kinds of business that you're talking about, I think they're really neat. And I would love to explore how to make that happen here. So, great. Well, thank you again for the chance to speak here. Really honored, and see you in touch.
Thank you. I have a bag full of innovative, low-cost items, which I'm transferring to the mayor. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
That was a delight. This went really well. Thank you so much.